everyone, welcome back or welcome to my channel. You may notice that this is a different setup. Welcome to my living room and welcome to my first ever unboxing. I got a very exciting package in the mail today, and since it's art related, I figured I would open it here and then we'll decide to make something from the contents of this box. So Nerdy Crafter put out the Super Not Another Crap art kit, and I thought that the value of the of the items inside the box was well worth the price, and I really actually want to get into some of the stuff that's in this box, so I figured I may as well get myself one. No, if the cats will let me open it. So along with this box, you got this like downloadable PDF that had a shape of the animal on it. So what I chose to do was like a random prop generator, and it gave me like some sort of horse-like animal, and then all these things that I'm writing on the screen. So anyways, the prompt that I ended up going with was a goat mixed with moss, rubber stamps, and fungus. So the original idea was to have like the rubber stamp part kind of on the back dripping down like wax, and then have fungus and mushrooms growing out and around the little goat guy. So first things first, I took everything out of the molds. I painted the circle part brown, literally just to paint it white and then brown again, don't know why, and I sanded everything. I started using the Super Sculpey or Cause Clay, I guess. Yeah, it's Cause Clay, to start making the appendages for my goat. Here we started with the ears, which, as you can see, and you're going to see for the rest of these clips, it took me a bazillion tries to get anything to work properly for me. This is the first time I was working with this clay and trying to fit a vision so closely with this kind of clay, so it took me a while to get used to it. After making the ears, I made the horns, which I did by making really thin snakes of clay and then just gently twisting them in my fingers to give them like that segmented appearance. It took a while because I couldn't get them to be the same size or length, of course, but eventually we got it. Moving on to other parts of the little scene, I started making mushroom tops, which I basically just took like a flat-ish or just a chunk of clay and then sort of flattened it, and then used the rubber shaping tools in order to cut out little grooves and whatever the little lines underneath the mushroom caps are called. My friend who's like really into nature will kill me for not knowing the proper names of these things, but that's a problem for another time. To make the slightly taller type of mushroom, I used my pinky finger and then shaped the clay around that, and that seemed to work really well. And then I did the same thing with the silicone shapers to get the lines underneath. And I just made a bunch of different mushrooms of various sizes and shapes. I didn't want them all to be uniform, and they had to fit on the circle, so they couldn't all be extra large. So I do have some like teeny tiny ones that are gonna end up going there. Now I've got a whole bunch of different mushrooms and their stalks made, so I'm moving on to making the shelf-like mushrooms that you usually see growing on trees. So I basically did the same thing as the other mushrooms and took a chunk of clay, flattened it out, but then for these ones I folded them so that they made a right angle shape. And then I used my silicone shapers as well as like this dental pick tool I found at the dollar store to cut little grooves into the bottom. And then I stacked them on top of each other so that they made the little shelf-like pattern. So I did this a few times, and this is the fungus that's like mostly growing on the goat because it was cool to have it like growing out the side of his neck or whatever. So yeah, you can see that I just have them all perched on the little turntable that came in the kit, which worked out really well for just placing the clay down, having it stick there, and then, you know, turning it, and then you have a new blank little canvas space. Once everything was finished with that, at this point I'd already made the base of the log as well and baked it with those. So the log itself is just a ball of tin foil, covered in a thin layer of clay, it got baked with the mushrooms, and then what I'm doing now is I'm just adding really, really thin sheets of clay that I've torn at the edges and then laid it around the edge of the log in order to make it look like it's broken bark. I thought that was a really cool technique, and it worked really well for this. And because this is Cause clay, it's very flexible after it's baked, so I didn't have to worry about any of those little pieces breaking off after it's baked, because it is quite flexible. So once I made it all the way around the trunk on both sides, I did leave the center a little bit soft so I could carve the rings of the tree into it, and then I moved into adding some texture the same way that you would add texture into like clothing on clay sculptures, as I've seen the masters of YouTube do. And for this one, I'm using the metal shaper as well as the silicone shapers, because I found that I was able to get the shape that I wanted using both of those tools. It's a little bit easier to press the clay down and get it to blend with the metal shaper, whereas like softer details are easier with the silicone shapers. There is a plastic stick just chilling in the top of the log, and that's basically a placeholder because I wanted it to look like there were branches at one point that had broken off. The original intent was to keep those branches in there, and then I remembered that plastic melts in the oven, so we couldn't keep those in there. Now we're making some rocks. So classic way to make rocks is you'd use tin foil and cover it in clay, and then use more tin foil to texture said clay, as you can see I'm doing now. Very effective way to do this when you don't have like rocks. I was doing this in the winter time, so there were no visible rocks outside. And once I thought that I made enough, I made some more extra teeny tiny little mushrooms that were going to be affixed to the goat. Once I kind of figured out where I wanted the rest of my mushrooms to go, there was a few blank spaces that looked like it needed some more. So I just went ahead and made a couple extras here using the same techniques as before, and then all of it got baked in the oven. And now I'm just making his little tail, which is probably my least favorite part of this whole thing, but whatever. Once the goat and log were affixed together and to the base, I started adding the mushrooms on with the bacon bond that came in the kit. This was more difficult than I thought it was going to because nothing wanted to stick together. I tried like scoring the Cause clay, but because the plaster was so smooth in some parts, it was very difficult to get them to adhere to each other. You can probably tell that my plaster goat is not all plaster. I did try and fix some of the major flaws in it with some clay, and that was just to make sure that he wasn't like completely super lumpy. Now I did add a couple extra little pieces of clay when attaching some of the mushrooms and fungus because there was too much of a gap and it didn't look like it was actually growing out of him. So that's kind of what I just did there. And then to add the mushrooms to the base disc, I plunked the bottom stem part into a chunk of clay and then slowly just rubbed the edges so that they would blend seamlessly into the ground. That part didn't have to be perfect because I knew I was covering the base, so I didn't really try too hard to make it super flush like I did with the goat body, but I did want to smooth it out for the most part. After all the mushrooms and whatnot was added, I moved on to putting his ears on, making them symmetrical. Not an easy task. It did help that these were baked so they weren't like losing their shape while I was trying to put them on there. But again, they didn't want to stick to the goat regardless of the bacon bond and whatnot, so I did have to add a bunch of extra clay on there. Oh, I guess maybe they weren't baked. I thought they were. Well, it goes to show that after 2 years, kind of forget what you've done. The last thing, other than like the tail and the billy goat gruff part, is the horns. They wanted to slide off the head, but I did manage to get them to stick after a while. Sometimes it was just easier to use my fingers to place all these little clay things instead of the tools that seem to kind of just push the clay around sometimes, but using a combination of fingers, silicone, and metal tools, I got it to work out in the end for all of these little parts. Here's that little billy goat gruff part I was talking about. I don't know what you call it, if that's actually what it's called, or it's just like his little beard. I debated whether or not I actually wanted to add the beard, but I figured it looked too much or not enough like a goat without the beard, so I put it on there, and then just adding the tail as the final touch. Then we add a little base coat and we're finally on to painting. For the goat itself, I kept him mostly white-ish, or like I added a little bit of cream and then various shades of brown and black just splotched all over to give a nice messy little look to him. And then I went in and painted all of the stems of the, or stalks of the mushrooms, whatever you call them, like an antique white color, before going ahead and painting the log and the ground and even some of the mushrooms a brown color. I guess I painted the rocks gray as well at this point. All the flatter mushrooms I painted red, and then the like tall, skinnier ones, those ones I painted brown. And it was just to give a little bit of variety. Everything looks the same right now, but I do end up fixing that. As you can see here, I changed the color of the brown to be more red. And then now I'm just doing some dry brushing to bring out the detail on the log. This is my absolute favorite part of this whole sculpture, is this log. It turned out so good, and it gave me so much faith in my sculpting abilities. And then we move on to painting the ground green. So we painted it brown and then white and then brown and now green. Are you following along? And then I guess we took a break from that and added the white speckles to the red mushrooms. I don't know if all red mushrooms actually have white speckles, but in my mind they do, so I added them. The brown ones I just left plain like that, otherwise it would have been a little bit too busy. But these dotting tools that were on the other end of the silicone shapers came in clutch for painting the spots. I'm just adding like a darker wash to some of the recesses of the mushrooms to show off a little bit of that detail before fixing up the patterning and the colors of the goat. And then the last part was just painting in the little details, so I added some like pale pink to the insides of his ears. It took a little while to get my itty bitty tiny brush to paint the right strokes in there, because painting sculptures is actually kind of hard. But then we painted the horns a gray color, dry brushed them a little bit with lighter gray, and then painted on the eyes, nose, and mouth. The nose, cute. Eyes, I went with yellow because that's pretty common according to pictures I found online. And then I gave them a little bit of eyeliner and a pupil. And then the long painstaking process of mossifying the whole thing. But then we're all finished. So here are the glamour shots of my little goat sculpture. I didn't quite follow the prompt because I couldn't get the rubber seal part to work. He was gonna have red rubber wax or whatever pouring over his back, but it didn't work out. So maybe one day if I repaint this digitally or something, I can do that. But here's some close-up images of this. Again, I'm really sorry that the footage got lost for 2 years, but I hope you enjoyed this video regardless. If you did, make sure to leave a like, comment down below, subscribe to my channel. I post new videos on Mondays, sometimes on Wednesdays. I hope you have a lovely week, and I will see you all in the next video.